Klint Kubiak said he was going to get back in the building on Thursday and get to work. Well, get to work he did. That plus more comes up on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for February 13th, 2026.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one sports podcast network. We're very proud of that. We're also very proud of the fact that this show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of your consistent support and the great job that my man Ari does behind the scenes, making sure that we look good and sound good by way of the YouTube page. So we shout him out. We appreciate him. You can find him on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well, as many of you do, at your boy Q254. And if you want to be a part of the show, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line for you, 707-654-4693. As we close out the show and close out the week, we'll hear from you. Calls, texts. Got a really lengthy text that I've been putting off for a couple days because I just didn't have time to get it into the show. I'll make sure I do that. If I have to do that, the very first one, I'll make sure it happens. Coming up in segment number 3. Matter of fact, it's from Philly Raiders, so we'll make sure to get that one in for sure in segment number 3. Segment number 2, the latest and the greatest when it comes to Maxx Crosby. It's the conversation that won't go away. Want to talk about a guy that's being talked about on every network, every show. Every time that someone is on social media, they're talking about Maxx Crosby. That's the conversation going on right now. Is he or is he not going to play with the Raiders in 2026? NFL Network's Tom Pelissero was on the Rich Eisen show and gave a very lengthy response and kind of give updated details on what's going on with Maxx Crosby. So you'll hear that coming up. Segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, news and notes of the day. And it all has to do about Klint Kubiak, the head coach of the Raiders, and his coaching staff. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. I mentioned Tom Pelissero talking about Maxx Crosby. Well, he also tweeted out on Thursday about the first hire for Klint Kubiak on the coaching staff of the Silver and Black. He said the Raiders are hiring Mike McCoy as assistant head coach per sources. McCoy is 53, spent 4 years as the Chargers head coach, finished last season as the Titans interim coach, an experienced addition to Klint Kubiak's staff. So very important hire. Klint Kubiak came back from the parade that happened in Seattle on Wednesday, celebrating their championship, and immediately got to work and hired his assistant head coach in Mike McCoy. I reached out to a good friend, Teresa Walker, who covers the Titans, on Thursday to try to get her on my radio show. She's actually going to join the show coming up this afternoon at 3 o'clock to talk about Mike McCoy. And all she told me in text is he was a godsend for the Tennessee Titans. They fired their head coach, Brian Callahan, halfway through the season, and Mike McCoy took over as an interim. And he was working directly with the number 1 overall pick, quarterback Cam Ward. And she said even though they didn't have a successful season, he was able to do some really good things and kind of bring some normalcy to the team. So a very experienced guy. Again, 4 years as a head coach there with the Chargers, and now he's the assistant head coach of the Silver and Black. So when you're a first-time head coach like Klint Kubiak is, it makes sense to have a guy that's been there, done that, right? We talked about that when it could be potentially Jim Schwartz coming in as the defensive coordinator. Also a guy that's been there, done that, has some head coaching experience. Thought, okay, maybe that'll be the guy. Instead, it's going to be Mike McCoy as the assistant head coach. Again, that's per Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network. Also, he went on to say the Raiders are interviewing Seahawks wide receivers coach Frisman Jackson for their offensive coordinator job, per source. And a lot of folks didn't know who Frisman Jackson was. He's a guy that's been around the National Football League and college football for a very long time. Has been a coordinator, matter of fact, a wide receivers coach basically wherever he goes. I know him very well from his time on Matt Rule's staff when he was at Baylor. He was the wide receiver coach there. But, I mean, he's a coach that's been the Seahawks wide receiver coach for the last couple years. Before that, he's been at places like Baylor, Temple, NC State, Northern Illinois, Akron, Western Illinois, also Tennessee, the Panthers, and the Steelers, all as wide receiver coach, currently Seattle Seahawks coach. So he's interviewing for the OC job. I'm not saying he's going to get it. I have no idea. But he also could be a guy that Klint Kubiak is saying, I'd like to bring you in as a wide receiver coach, but give you a little bit of a bump in pay, obviously an upgrade in title. So it's not a lateral move, so the Seahawks can't block him. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I saw some people just looking at that as that's a Rooney Rule interview. I don't, how I feel about that. Can't stand that because these guys work their tails off to get these opportunities, and just to be kind of dismissed as, that's just a Rooney Rule interview. I can't stand that. And again, Frisman Jackson is really good at a wide receiver coach. I don't know what's going to end up happening, but he did interview with the Silver and Black. Also, this is from Ari Mayroth from the 33rdteam.com. He said the Raiders are expected to interview defensive line coach and run game coordinator Robbie Leonard for their DC position per source. Very notable, as Leonard is one of the coaches Maxx Crosby respects the most in the building. Leonard has had interest from other teams this cycle, and Robbie Leonard is a guy that I have a lot of respect for. I've talked about him quite a bit. I think he's going to be a defensive coordinator sooner rather than later. The Raiders are interviewing him. I saw a lot of people online saying, I hope they're not just interviewing him just to try to appease Maxx Crosby. I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that that makes any sense for Klint Kubiak to try to do that. I think if they give Robbie Leonard the job, it's because they feel like he deserves a job. He's a guy that's been a coach for 15 years, right? I know a lot of people don't know how much experience he has, but he has plenty of experience. 13 years in the National Football League. He's worked with Brian Flores in Miami as a linebackers coach, worked with Coach Mike McDonald in Baltimore, linebackers coach. Where did Klint Kubiak come from? Seattle. Who's the head coach? Mike McDonald. You got it. So I believe that it's a big-time interview opportunity. I think it's a well-earned interview opportunity for Robbie Leonard. He was one of the guys that when Patrick Graham took his talents to Pittsburgh to be the Steelers defensive coordinator, a lot of people wondered, is he going to take Robbie Leonard with them? I was one of them. I was glad to see that he didn't. And, I would have no problem if Robbie Leonard ended up getting that defensive coordinator position. He could grow in that position, just like Klint Kubiak's going to try to grow in the position as head coach. And I know that that's a little dangerous at times, not having guys with, familiarity and experience at the DC position and the head coaching position. But again, he's been around the game for a very long time. He's been a coach for a very long time, and he's got a lot of respect in that building. And that would also help provide some continuity. But again, just kind of updating you on the different coaches that have either been hired, interviewed, plan to be interviewed, and obviously there's a lot more where that came from as well. Wanted to get you caught up with the latest and the greatest. Now, speaking of the latest and the greatest, Maxx Crosby, what is everyone saying about Mad Max? Will he or won't he be a Raider in 2026? You'll hear from Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network coming up. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before I get to that, though, I do want to tell you about one of the great sponsors we have here on the show, and that is Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. So if I'm looking to hire someone for this show, you know where I'd go? Straight to Indeed. When I was looking to hire someone for the radio station, you know where I went? You got it, straight to Indeed. Instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Sponsored jobs boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role and then make a real difference. And according to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posts directly on Indeed are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. Right now, spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of the Locked On Raiders podcast get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Again, Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Right now, support the show. Let them know that you heard about it on the Locked On Raiders podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Got to get the latest and the greatest when it comes to Maxx Crosby. This is a conversation that's not going to go away anytime soon. I do believe that at the scouting combine coming up at the end of the month in Indianapolis, there's going to be a lot of conversations going on between Crosby's people, other teams, the Raiders. There's going to be a lot of conversation. And I say that because, well, it happens with every team. The scouting combine is great for the NFL draft. It's great to go there and be able to, catch up with some of the prospects, talk to them, get some interviews. It's not really that great for some of the workouts because, again, a lot of people take too much from the workouts, but it's usually the interview process. It's usually getting to know the measurables, the health, right? They always go through the medicals. That stuff is really good, but it's also good for those late nights at St. Elmo's, right? When they have, all the networking events. And trust and believe, when I'm there, I'll go to those events, and, man, there'll be NFL insiders all over the place. There'll be GMs all over the place. There'll be ownership. Jerry Jones always has his bus down there. There's all these different people just roaming the streets of Indianapolis, and they're talking about football business. Now, you got it. It's not the league year, so really it's not even the time for legal tampering, but that's when all the legal tampering goes on behind the scenes. Like, nobody is talking about that, right? It's like, no, that's not really happening. Wink, wink. it's really happening. So I'm sure that the Maxx Crosby conversation will be one of the biggest conversations coming up at the end of the month. But right now, every time you turn on TV, every time you turn on the radio, you hit social media, whatever the case may be, you turn on a podcast like this one, something conversation is going on about Maxx Crosby. So Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network was on the Rich Eisen show. He's a part of ESPN right now. He was on that show on Thursday, and Rich asked him straight up, well, what's the latest when it comes to Maxx Crosby and the Raiders?
Here's what I would say. Maxx Crosby, and Clint alluded to this, he is in the building every day. He is doing his rehab. He's doing his workouts. He continues to go about his football-related business the way that he always has. My understanding is that conversation with Klint Kubiak was positive. Max, and I think that he mentioned it on that podcast, is impressed by some of the things that he knows about Klint Kubiak. He enjoyed that conversation. But there are a lot of other fences that would need to be mended for Maxx Crosby to stay in Las Vegas. He's been through, 6 or 7 head coaches in his time there. He's been to the playoffs once. He's played through a ton of injuries. When you think back through all the players that have come and gone from that place over the time, the Maxx Crosby has been there, he's like the lone wolf still standing. And so there's really two sides of this, Rich. It's not solely Maxx Crosby and what he wants to do. Again, I would anticipate the combine is coming up in a couple of weeks. I would anticipate that there are more conversations there between Crosby's representatives and Raiders brass. Certainly Max, has some decisions to make after the way that things ended last year, shut down at a time that he did not want to be shut down. He's got to decide whether or not he can be all in once again after taking so many leaps through the years with different coaches and different regimes and then seeing the plug pulled within a year or two. He does have a great relationship and an affinity for Mark Davis. And so, there is some part of him that's always wanted to be, and he said that before, wants to be a Raider. On the flip side of it, too, you have a Raiders team that has to decide, does it even make sense for us to hang on to Maxx Crosby, particularly if at some point he very clearly and decisively says, I don't want to be here. If the Raiders, as Klint Kubiak evaluates this roster, comes to the conclusion that, hey, in the next year or two, we can do the quick flip. We can get this thing on track. We can be competing to go to the playoffs. You might say, we want Max here. We need him. He's 27, about to turn 28 years old. He's still in his prime. We think we can flip this fast enough that he can continue to be the cultural center of everything we're doing, particularly on defense. We're going to grow, and he's going to be a part of the turnaround. If Clint and his staff, along with John Spytek in the front office, look at this roster the way a lot of other people do around the NFL and say, this is a complete ground-up rebuild, other than Bowers, Genty, Colton Miller, it's a pretty short list of your core players. This is going to be 3 years or more. The best way to hasten that rebuild is to trade Maxx Crosby, who at this point can still command, if not 2 first-round picks, certainly a first-round pick and more. Mm-hmm. There are many teams that would be salivating over getting Maxx Crosby. You could have a bidding war that plays out up until the start of free agency on March 11th, max out his value, no pun intended, and move on. So you have moving parts on both sides of this thing. It is not an impossibility, Rich, that Maxx Crosby is back with the Raiders. It is certainly a possibility that he is not, but there are multiple voices here, including Max and Klint Kubiak, all the way up to Mark Davis, who are going to be a part of this decision. Absolutely, this is going to be one to follow in the weeks to come.
Very lengthy, detailed answer right there from Tom Pelissero, and he actually went on to talk about him a little bit more and talked about the relationship with the Raiders and talked about mending fences, and he's in the building daily. There's two sides of the story. There's a lot going on. Max is going to have to make some decisions. The team is going to have to make some decisions. Right? Does it make sense for him to still be a Raider? Do the timelines match up? There's a lot that goes into it. At the end of the day, reality is, even if he wants to go and the Raiders don't want to move him, they don't have to. I mean, he's under contract. It's that simple. It's not like it's a year-to-year thing. It's not like it's college football and he's got an NIL deal and he has to decide if he wants to come back or renew or re-up. It's not that. He literally just signed a contract extension last year around this time. So if they don't want to do anything, they could definitely just say, hey, I understand you're upset, but okay, you're rocking with us. You're too talented. We don't want to let you out of the building. Or they could say, you know what? You've done everything that we want you to do. You've done more than we've asked you to do. You've gone through hell and high water. you want to go, okay, we'll move you and try to get the most in return for him, right? And I think there's a handful of teams that probably would be interested. I know Tom Pelissero thinks it's going to be like everyone's interested, but everyone doesn't make sense for Maxx Crosby, right? I mean, the reality is he's trying to win. So going to a team like the Jets, who's picking number 2 overall, even though they got multiple first-round picks, doesn't make a lot of sense. They're in a bad position like the Raiders, if not worse, because they don't have a quarterback. At least the Raiders have an opportunity to get their quarterback in Fernando Mendoza coming up at the end of April. So, again, I look at it like a handful of teams have an opportunity to get him. He very well easily could say, you know what, I'm going to ride this thing out, right? Because I have a lot of respect for Mark Davis, have a lot of respect for the Raider Nation. I want to be a Raider and get this thing turned around. And I know that in his heart he truly does. But he also has to decide what makes sense for him. And the Raiders, like Tom Pelissero said, need to decide what makes sense for them as well. If it doesn't match up, if it's all of a sudden going to be a 3 or 4 year build, they could say, hey, Max, we're going to move you to get the most capital for you. And I know nobody wants to hear that because he's a really talented player. But if they're trying to turn things around really quickly and they don't see it matching up with the timeline, and by the time they're ready to be good, Max is at the tail end of his career, it might not make a whole lot of sense. So, again, this is a conversation that's going to continue to go on. I try not to update it every day, but, of course, there's definitely plenty of updates. When you get something like that from Tom Pelissero, when it's that detailed, it's only right that I bring it to the table. So I wanted to make sure that I got that and got out in front of that one and let you hear what the latest and the greatest is. And, again, expect for the next couple of weeks to hear a lot on Max. And at the scouting combine, there'll probably be a lot of conversations coming out of there. Will he or won't he play for the Silver and Black in 2026? What's on your mind? Your calls and texts will close out the show. 707-654-4693. We'll hear from you next. Before I get to that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor we have here on the show, and that is FanDuel. The Winter Games are officially here. If you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. That's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel, well, it just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about the most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected in all the action. Hockey games, they feel different right from the opening faceoff, right? Speed skating, races decided by inches, precision, you got to love it. The drama of curling matches, they start out slow and then they intensify. All that is all good. Even niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked into competition. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Calls and texts after that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Before we get into that, though, do want to thank you so much for making this the first listen of the day. You know it means a lot to us. So we'll go ahead and start things off with a call from Long Island Raider. Not Long Island Iced Tea, but Long Island Raider. He's calling to talk about the upcoming NFL draft, Fernando Mendoza, and more. Here he is, Long Island Raider.
Hey, Q, it's Long Island Raider. I got a general question for you regarding this year's draft and next year's draft class. I know the Raiders obviously are expected to take Mendoza with the number 1 pick, and I know it's easy to focus on him because he's the only solid quarterback in the class this year. But I wanted to find out, 1, how he would stack up in next year's draft class that's supposed to be QB heavy, and 2, would it be smart for the Raiders to trade capital and use those picks in next year's class to draft a quarterback that has more potential? The only reason I think this is, because obviously when there's one fish in a fish tank, it's a pretty fish. When there's an average fish and a fish tank full of other fish, then obviously you have more options, more preference, more better, fits. Anyway, I don't know. I guess I just wanted your feedback. Long Island Raider, out.
Long Island, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. And, yeah, look, Mendoza, according to Albert Breer, Monday Morning Quarterback, SI.com, who was on Cowherd show the other day, he was talking about him coming in 4th. As a matter of fact, listen to this. This is what he had to say about Fernando Mendoza and where he would have been if he had, if he had been in the draft with Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May.
2 years ago, when Caleb Williams went first, Jaden Daniels went second, Drake May went 3rd, Penix went 8th, McCarthy went 10th, and Nix went 12th. The consensus I've gotten is that he would have been the 4th of those quarterbacks, so right in the middle. I think most teams like the makeup. They like how much he's won. They like the accuracy. But is he physically what say Drake May was coming out of North Carolina, or Jaden Daniels was coming out of LSU, or Caleb Williams was coming out of USC. He's not that.
So he would have been fourth in that, in that class. And guess what? That's okay. That's okay. Fourth in that class is fine. Caleb Williams has been fantastic. Jaden Daniels has been good when he's healthy. Drake May was there in line to be an MVP this year. I'm okay with him being fourth. I think that that's a really good quarterback. I've heard comps to Matt Ryan. I've heard comps to Kirk Cousins. I've heard comps to Jared Goff. Look, I don't like to put names on who these guys could be because they're their own individual person, but I think the dude's a really good quarterback. I think he's got it between the ears. He's definitely got a strong arm. He's got the size. He's got enough athleticism. He doesn't have to be a guy who runs around the yard, and he's got that leadership skills that I think the Raiders need in a major way. I don't think it makes any sense to trade the pick, right, unless you're just not feeling Mendoza. If you're in that building, and apparently, I don't know, I got some random text that I didn't even know who it came from on Thursday saying that, my buddies are saying that Mendoza's not all that. Okay. Well, maybe you're right? Maybe they're right. They know better than I do. But from the naked eye, from my eye, just from watching football, I think that he's a really good quarterback, and I think he could be a really good quarterback for the Silver and Black. But that's, again, that's just me. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to trade the pick, and then maybe you're in a position where you have to take that extra capital that you just got and trade back up. It's kind of like being at the triple-double diamond machine, and I win. And then instead of cashing out, I stay there and keep playing. And then all of a sudden I just gave it all back and then some, right? It just doesn't make any sense. If you're going to win, once you're winning, cash out, right? But a lot of times when these scenarios happen, if you trade back, you get that extra capital, then you're in a position you can't get your quarterback and you're trying to go get him. What do you have to do? Trade back up to go get him. So, I mean, it all depends on what you want. If the Raiders are feeling Fernando Mendoza, there's no reason for them not to get him. And I do believe that they're going to get Fernando Mendoza when it's all said and done. But thanks for the call. I do appreciate you. Let's go ahead and get another call in real quick because I got a lengthy text from Philly Raider. This call comes from Joe in Arizona. He's calling to talk about head coach Klint Kubiak and how he feels about the hire, the Raiders in general, and where his excitement level is right now. And trust me, his excitement level is high. Here's Joe in Arizona.
Yo, Q. 2K. Yeah, man. Klint Kubiak. This is Joe from Arizona. Man, I'm excited. We got an offensive coach now. Very creative offensive coach. Well, coordinator. We'll see how he does as a coach, right? But I'm excited, man. Hopefully, we're all thinking we're going to get Mendoza. If Kubiak finds it, that's the guy, say, hey, let's get him, man. I'm excited for this new season. Man, I'm just excited. Obviously, we've had a lot of letdowns, one and done coaches and stuff like that, man. But yeah, man, I'm excited. Already next week excited, and I can't wait for the season to start, man. See what we got, man. Hopefully the coaches line up. We get a good defensive coordinator. And, hopefully Kubiak brings some guys to that O-line, quarterback coaches and stuff like that. And, yeah, man, I'm excited, man. People are saying we don't got talent. Yeah, we do, man. Jack Beck is one. Obviously, Bowers, Genty, Myers. Man, I'm excited, man. I'm really excited for the season. And, yeah, man, let's see what we got. Raider Nation. Time to get excited, man. Q, peace out.
Big Joe, thanks so much for the call. I appreciate you. And look, I can say at this stage, it's exciting, right? When you start to think about the press conference for Antonio Pierce, you think about the press conference for Pete Carroll. Now you think about the press conference for Klint Kubiak. Even though all three of them had a level of excitement, it just feels like all three were different, right? And this one feels like it's really good because we all saw what Klint Kubiak just did for the Seahawks on his way to winning the Super Bowl. We saw the offense that he was able to put together. Now, being the CEO of the team, being the head coach is a different ballgame. There's no doubt about that, right? And, of course, the Raiders need to get the right weapons in place. They need to get the offensive line right. They need to get all the players on the same page, right? There's a lot that they've got to do. They got to get the right coaches in place. So they're not going to be the Seahawks immediately, right? But you do understand that he's a sharp offensive mind, and if he can get all the pieces in place that he needs to, then that's a plus, right? The team building, that's going to be fun to watch. Right now, he's putting the coaching staff together. Then there's free agency. Then there's the draft. Again, I'll be at the scouting combine coming up at the end of the month in Indy, right? And then all of a sudden the draft hits in April. Then you get training camp, and all that. And then you get into the regular season, and hopefully things go good. But, yeah, I mean, each and every month there's a reason to get excited for the next stage of what Klint Kubiak's trying to do in this chapter of Raider football. But thanks so much for the call. Definitely appreciate you. We'll close out with a text from Philly Raider. I've actually held on to this one for a couple days. Very lengthy. This is I'd call this 2 chapters. At least 2 long paragraphs. But in text form, I call this a chapter. This says, "Hey Q, long-time listener, first-time texter." Well, I'll tell you right now, he got everything that was on his mind out in this text. This is how long it is. Just wanted to comment on a common line we've been hearing from the media at large. Everyone says, "Oh, they need to tear it all down. They need to start from scratch. They need to completely rebuild, etc., etc." We all understand what that concept means, but what does it actually mean? I believe that process has already started. Not that it should start this coming year. This past season was a tear-it-down year. It doesn't get any lower than what it was last year. They decided not to spend their money in free agent and fill obvious holes because they knew the roster wasn't ready for significant investment yet. That was a conscious choice. They can't afford to do it again this year, and I don't believe they will. This coming season shouldn't be branded as a tear-it-down year, but instead a build-it-up year. I don't believe for a second they sold Klint Kubiak on the job to tear it down. They would have sold him on building it up. So they got their first-choice coach candidate they believe in, which is something they haven't done in a very long time. Next up, upgrade both trenches considerably with the available cap space, draft Mendoza, and start to build this program. I think next season could be a season of hope, if not one of winning. If they could build up both trenches and get the franchise quarterback, winning 6 to 8 games would feel like real progress. Then you're no longer in the basement and can build from a solid foundation. That's paragraph 1 from Philly Raider. Yeah, paragraph 1. And look, it pretty much was a tear it all down last year, with them not spending very much money in free agency and, just kind of seeing what they had, get a real assessment of the team. And now they do get to move forward. You're absolutely right with that. I still think it's going to be a slow process. 6 to 8 wins seems a little rich to me, but if they get it, cool. That's great, right? But we all know they're coming off a season where they won 3 games last year. So we'll see how it all comes together. We'll see how quickly Klint Kubiak could become a true CEO and head coach and also play caller at the same time. How quickly he's able to adapt to that. That'll be something to pay attention to as well. Now, Philly Raider is not done. He goes on and gives us another paragraph. Last note on the Maxx drama. I would love to keep Maxx at least one more season and try to convince him on this plan. If he's still not happy after that, then shake hands and allow him to find success elsewhere and get Maxx compensation in return. After all the years of middling mediocrity, why would Maxx want to force his way out now when there's actually a realistic path to success? I understand his frustration because as fans, we're frustrated too. We're not even in the building, but we don't need to tank because we already have the first pick. He already endured the worst of it, and there's no reason to keep tearing it down. It's about building it up now. He'd be a great person to have in the building during this transition to a new franchise quarterback and can show him the standard and how to lead a franchise forward. I think he could be sold on that plan once the dust settles. But if he truly refuses to play for the Raiders like reports say, then make that move before the draft to maximize value and don't let the situation linger and bring drama into the season. Drama is not the right environment to bring a franchise quarterback and a new rookie head coach into. I think they got the right coach. Now they just have to make the right follow-up moves and give the guy time to build it up. For the first time in a while, I think there's legitimate hope and a path forward for the franchise, but they still have to do the right things from here. Thanks for all that you do for the Nation Q, Philly Raider. Whew. That was lengthy, but I get your point, and that's why we talked about Maxx Crosby in segment number 2. I do think that there'll be another conversation or multiple conversations with John Spytek. I believe there'll be multiple conversations with Klint Kubiak and Maxx Crosby, all coming together on a plan of what they want to do. I don't blame Maxx if he does want to go because, yeah, he's dealt with a bunch of mediocrity, and it would be great to have him in the building, but also if there's no path for him to be close to being successful, he might look at it like, well, why do I have to be the guy that has to deal with all the losing, right? How come I don't have a chance to win games? And if he does have a chance to win games, he might just have to, say goodbye and get as much, trade value out of it as possible. It would definitely be before the draft. It's not going to be any higher value than before the draft. You don't want to do it after. That doesn't make any sense. You want to at least try to get as much as possible this year if, in fact, they do move on from him. I don't think that they're going to do it. The only way I think that they'll do it is if he decides he wants to go. Something I've been saying, I'm going to continue to say it until, something happens somehow, some way, by hook or by crook, like my guy Raider Fisher Berkeley likes to say. So, again, with that being said, there'll be a lot of conversations about Maxx Crosby coming up at the end of the month at the Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. So thanks so much for that. Definitely appreciate you. Appreciate your text as well. So that's going to do it for today's show. It's going to do it for the week. I got to get some rest. Still recovering from the Super Bowl week, as you could tell. The voice is not where it needs to be, but that's okay. Got this weekend. It's Valentine's weekend. Make sure you enjoy that. I'm going to have on my radio show this afternoon at 2:30 Gary Kubiak. So Klint Kubiak's dad, 4-time Super Bowl champ. He'll join the show to talk a little bit more about his son and what he brings to the table and just kind of give us a little bit of background on what Klint and obviously the Kubiak family means when it comes to football, as they are truly a football family. So that'll be a lot of fun. Again, 2:30 this afternoon, Raider Nation Radio, 920. So have a fantastic weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Again, enjoy Valentine's Day. And, of course, as always, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.